This lecture has been made available to you courtesy of the American Numismatic Society.
So this Money Talks is in honor of the publication of my book, and I'm really excited about it. It's been a long road, and the challenge that I was set, my forwarding key, I can see it. There we are. The challenge that I was set by Andy Meadows when he was just starting to develop this series was to try and explain the importance of Roman Republican coins to students of Roman Republican history. In fact, I will confess, I wrote the very first proposal that Cambridge approved for one of these volumes, even though I am the fourth such volume to appear, which means all of these people leapfrogged me and completed their task a bit faster than I managed. But it was a really exciting experience to start writing it. And in fact, Andy gave me the compliment of not inviting me to write the Roman Republican one, but his invitation was for the Roman provincial volume. What can Roman provincial coinage say? And I said that even though I'd worked on RPC4 in my postdoc, and I'd spent a number of years on Roman provincial coinage, that my heart as a historian wasn't in the Roman provinces. It was very much with the Roman Republican series. So if he wanted something from me that I would like to write on the Roman Republic, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and I didn't know then how much I didn't know about the subject and how far I had to learn in order to write a book that would work in this brilliant series with its goals that I'm 100% behind. And of course, one of my mentors on Roman provincial coinage, but even back in my student days, was Chris Haugigo, who had written, when I was a student, the very recent book, Ancient History from Coinage, which had really became a standard textbook for how historians approach numismatics. So I had a model in my mind from Haugigo's book about the tone and depth and expertise that I wanted my book to have. But of course, I didn't have all of those years of lived experience that Haugigo brought to his volume. So the books in the series, besides mine, are Lisa Kellett and John Cole's wonderful Athenian Empire book, Claire Rowan's Caesar to Augustus, and Peter Toneman's Barnstormer, the Hellenistic World Using Coins as Sources. The series has also evolved as new volumes have come up and responded to feedback. So in the first instance, Peter Toneman was brave and he published his first, and it had coins illustrated to scale, which is standard in numismatics publications, as most of you know. But the critics of the book reviewers and students said it was too small. And that gave both Claire and I permission to go bigger with the images in our books to really hone in on our target audience, being the students of history rather than numismatics. My book is also the first to have any notes. All of the rest use inline text citation. If at all, I could not, I tried to learn how to write without footnotes, and they've turned into endnotes, but it is fully noted, my volume. And I'm very grateful to the press for allowing that. So you're already getting a sense of this having been a long road that I walked to get, or ran, slept, sometimes got on a motorcycle, but mostly plodded through trying to create a book that would live up to the standards of Andy's series. And one of the things that I learned that I'd been told previously is that to really capture an audience, one has to be able to tell a story. And I have, over the course of writing this book, learned more about academic storytelling, how to stitch together the information. And so part of what you're going to hear today is my story and where the agreement to write this book has taken me and my scholarship to try and understand what's interesting or intellectually gripping about, at least to me, about this book. The biggest struggle was coming up with a structure. My original proposal, dare I say back in 2008, was to have a strictly chronological approach to the coinage. I was unable to write a book that fit the confines of the series that was chronological. And I had most of the manuscript done in 2014 that was chronological, but it wasn't appropriate to the series. And so in the end of 2014, I set the project aside completely. And when I came back to it in 2018, after some time working on other projects, I embraced a thematic approach, and I used 4 subject titles. Chapter 1, money, is probably the most numismatic or familiarly numismatic chapter. Chapter 2 on monuments, of course, nods to both Meadows and Williams' JRS piece on moneta and the monuments, treating Roman money as monuments. It's divided into 2 parts. The first part is about individuals, families, and the states. And the second part is on the idea of a God-given empire, and more on Roman religion, but both fit into the idea of coins creating memorials or monuments to aspects that were valued by the individuals who created them, or the community that creates the coins. So 1 and 2 perhaps might feel the most familiar if you've been reading a lot about Roman Republican coins for a very long time. You may not find those 2 new or exciting in any particular way. Chapter 3 is where I start to break the mold a little bit, and I call it mutinies. And I'll come back to what's going on in chapter 3 in just a moment. But skipping ahead to chapter 4, mobilizations, this could have been called something like popular politics, but it acknowledges that this is an elite form of discourse, but it tries to fit what the coins can tell us into how people were mobilized, either mobilized for political action or actually moved in space and time through military deployments or colonization. So, and when I mentioned this to my dear friend Jo Quinn at Oxford, she teased me, and it created yet another footnote, because apparently this closely imitates some undergraduate lectures we used to attend from Nicholas Purcell. So apparently I've plagiarized my structure somewhat from Nicholas Purcell's thing, or got into my unconscious and I reflected that back up in this. But the problem with themes, and the reason that I was so resistant to writing a thematically organized book, which makes it easier basically to say, well, that's not part of the theme, so it doesn't get included, is that how do you actually find the information that you want? So in the front of the book, readers of the book will find 2 things. They're going to find a list of all types illustrated, so that if you know your Crawford number, or you know your Rutter number from Historia Numorum Italy, or any other coin number, you can see exactly where it's illustrated. But after that list, and I've not illustrated this on the slide, there's yet another list of all of the types that are mentioned, but not illustrated. So almost like an index locorum of ancient texts that you would find in a philological study, so that you can go right to the footnote where any coin is discussed. I resisted the urge to make the book even thicker, and Cambridge even more upset at the number of words that I was submitting by including an index decorum of ancient texts. But the other innovation is that I put a chronological table at the beginning. It stretches to over 5 pages, and it lists every historical event, or pseudo-historical for the legendary period, that's discussed in the book. The main idea here is that if a student or an instructor is looking at how to integrate the text into the book, they can know immediately what sections or images are best to put on their syllabus, and where I might join in a conversation in a chronological structure. I also, you'll notice, use the European method of numbering my sections, even down to 4 subsections within chapters. This is because of the rise of the Kindle edition without page numbers, to make it possible to cite quite precisely, not just image or footnote, but also passages of text where, say someone wishes to create a citation and they don't have access to page numbers. Of course, the book has page numbers, and I recommend you read it in a physical copy and enjoy the physical copy, but there are advantages to your to the Kindle edition. So if that's the structure, what are the leitmotifs? We all know that books have those red threads that run through the whole thing. These are going to be really familiar to any Roman Republican historian. I perhaps put religion ahead of militarism, but I would call them the 2 great pillars of Roman society. That if you're going to understand the motivations between both individual and collective action within the Roman state, you need to have an appreciation of how religious they were, the nature of their religious outlook, and the degree to which they celebrated militarism. And then the second 2 go hand in hand. The Roman Republic had very precise social hierarchies. Everyone knew where they fit into a hierarchy. And so if you're not paying attention to those hierarchies and how they determine how someone both perceives themselves and how they perceive others, you're going to miss a big block of what Roman history is about. And then the forever process of elite competition that drove so much of the change in the late Republic. So these leitmotifs are not unique to me. I think you would hear variations of them in any undergraduate survey of the Roman Republic and any good read. If you feel at any time that you would like a new introduction to the Roman Republic in a narrative history, not one focused on coins, but on people and events, Susan Treggiari has a biography of Servilia. That's the mother of Brutus. And it's just come out with Oxford University Press, and it's available beautifully read as an audiobook. It's quite pricey as a physical book, but as an audiobook, it's quite affordable. And I would say it is the best narrative, not of an individual, but of the whole history of the Republic, focused on one family and one individual in different time periods. So if you would like a more traditional linear narrative to hang anything that's in my book on, I would recommend wholeheartedly Susan Treggiari's new bibliography. So what's fresh or new? Is this a boring book that you can get nothing out of? I think I have some fresh takes, or at least a few insights. But Of course, I also am an author of my own time, and that is going to affect both how the text is read, and of course, what I was thinking as I was writing it. So the first thing I want to assure you is I do not wish to cancel anything. I do not want to cancel Roman Republican history. But I have, instead of having a chapter on, say, imperialism, I have a chapter on mutinies, which is what we could call the effects of imperialism. So I center in chapter 3 those who were disgruntled with the expansion of Rome. And so the first half of the chapter is about mostly failed, but attempts to resist Roman authority and how that comes out on the coinage. And it's some of our most exciting coinage. You can think of, say, the Capuan bronzes under Hannibal, the social war coinages, or even the narratives of the Sicilian slave uprisings, and little hints that we get from the coins. I also kept in mind that Cambridge wanted this book to speak to students in today's classroom, and I thought that these provided good stories that might be less familiar for instructors to bring to their students to complement potentially existing texts. The second half of chapter 3 on mutinies is called The Enemy Within. And it reframes how we look at the greats of the Republic, the Mariuses, the Sullas, the Pompeys, and looks at them as destabilizers of the Roman constitution, and treats their coinage, but frames them as political actors who are always, as I say in this passage, seeking to present themselves as pro-Roman, pro-Republic. Everyone is always for Libertas, but their actions, when they mobilize either their legions or the urban poor, are in effect destabilizing and eventually destroying the Republic. So this is a different new take on the story of great men. I looked back at the timestamps on my files, and I realized that this paragraph that I come back to again and again was written in July 2018. And as a historian, I went back and I started to read some of the headlines from that year, particularly in the run-up to the midterm elections of the Trump presidency, and to think about where our own nation's conversation about the right way to try and save a republic and how it was. And I have to acknowledge that it was written in a time where I was reading a great deal and thinking a great deal about my own republic, and that can't not be there. So I wish to own that. I would make the comparison that I was brought up on a steady diet of defensive imperialism, Roman, as an explanation for Roman foreign policy in the Roman Republic. It's all of the takes on the nature of Roman imperialism that William Harris tried to take down in his great War and Imperialism book. But the defensive imperialism take of, and even the outright imperialism take, the aggressive imperialism take of William Harris are very much a discourse of the era of the Vietnam War, the aftermath of the Vietnam War, and Roman and US and NATO military policies of the age of Reagan. And when you go back and read those texts, they sort of scream at you. And I find I can't set them to my current students anymore because they can only see the politics of the modern rather than the interpretation of the past. So it might be me, but it's also, there's a long tradition of using the Roman Republic or Roman Republican history being a thought ground for events. So I mentioned that there were a lot of false stories. Some of those false starts turned into some of the most interesting side projects and now current life endeavors that I'm working on. And I wanted to help tell the story of the book, but partly through what else it has birthed rather than the book itself. I started the project by creating long spreadsheets of all of the Roman Republican coins and thinking about how they would fit into different thematic or chronological arrangements and annotating all of them. I looked at every coin in the American Numismatic Society database because I was going to use their coins to illustrate it, thinking which coins had to be there. I do sometimes come back to those lists. And then, as I've already mentioned, the strictly historical chronology. In 2013, I realized that I needed a new way of storing my information. That I'd been using a lot of spreadsheets and PowerPoints and Excel files, and I was getting lost in my own materials. And so I created my blog. And originally it was anonymous. It was called Brooklyn Sabbatical because it was the year of my sabbatical and I was going to write something, and I held myself to writing every single day. And then an amazing thing happened, which was that Andrew McCabe stumbled upon my blog, and this started a conversation about who I was and who was authoring this blog post. And I got to watch for a while some wonderful, very thankfully flattering conversations speculating on my possible identity as a numismatist, an unknown numismatist in Brooklyn, until Rick Wachonke put everyone at ease and outed me to the interested parties. But I'm glad he did. At first, I had been planning to write it completely anonymously as sort of a playground to not be worried about my mistakes or my embarrassments, but just to get words out there in small, informal chunks. But it started a conversation, and that now friendship, I would say, with McCabe and the rest of the community has led to feedback and comments and discussions in real time on real ideas before I crystallize them into a formal publication. And so eventually the blog name changed. And of course I had to come back from sabbatical after the first year, but it's alive and well. And I still call it Adventures in my head because that's the feel of it. And it remains very informal and chatty and full of mistakes. You can cite it, but please, for good heavens, email me and ask me if I have discovered how incredibly wrong I was before you claim that I believe something. But it is still where I do all of my research. The other thing that happened that sabbatical year is I was writing in Beyler Bay on the Asian side of the Bosphorus. And I became, one of the sections I was trying to write through was on the Roman grain supply, because of course the grain supply is a major topic for the for Roman historians of the Roman Republic. And so I'd set myself the task of asking, what can the coins tell us about the grain supply? And I had been pulling all of the quantitative materials and past studies and looking over the coinage quite carefully. And I became really interested in 330, and I thought, well, this is going to give us some great comparative data for numbers thrown out, say, in Cicero's Varines, or in the life of Plutarch about expenditures by Cato and Caesar. We could actually know something about how many coins were actually produced for the purchase of grain in one instant. And of course, I knew from my graduate work all about Este and that. And so I wrote to Wachonke, Rick Wachonke, and and I said, has anyone ever done a dye study of 330? You know, where it seems like it has to be done. He said, well, have I told you about Richard Schaefer? I'm like, no. And so he introduced us. And Schaefer was wonderfully generous, and he sent me scans straight away of all of the material. And it was years later that I was able to come back to that material with some students, and I used it as a teaching tool to see what they could do with it. And working for a full semester on 330 with a team of 4 undergraduate students, I got my eye into it, and I became more and more convinced, and forgive me, Richard, I'm going to say the genius of Richard Schaefer and the archive that he has, and that what his work was, in fact, the most important thing to be saved for his and continued and shared for the study of Roman Republican coins. And so if you trace back RRDP, which is my current work with Lucia Carbone and the ANS, it all comes back to that moment when I was trying to answer the question, what can coins tell us about the grain supply and the issue 330. So that's one rabbit hole I ended up down. But the biggest rabbit holes, they were really all traps set for myself, by myself, because I didn't train as a numismatist. I trained as a historiographer. And that means I can't read a story one way, and I can never accept one version, particularly not if there's 20 different versions of the same story. And I knew for any book that was going to be read by college students, I had to have a section on foundation legends. So I had to know every Roman foundation legend and every coin that could possibly tie into a foundation legend and all of the literary variations thereof. This was a big rabbit hole, and Ulysses was the biggest of these rabbit holes. And it was finally published in 2015 in a book in honor of Rick, who will come up again and again because he's done so much for so many of us. And what the article says, in essence, is that if you go to the kernel of any Roman Republican Foundation legend and the iconography that is celebrated in it, it is an iconography of fides as well as divine blessing, of some form of loyalty or action of loyalty. And so I fit Ulysses, which there are legends that say Ulysses could be a founder of Rome, into that tradition. One of the things that was really fascinating for me was the degree to which colleagues who had worked on the Mamilius issue, and particularly Llewellyn Morgan and Gary Farney, both scholars I admire a great deal in their writing, did not talk in their work about the gems, and that the gem parallels, or intaglio parallels, many of them are in glass case, so cheap everyday materials, and what that said about it. And so almost all of the previous readings of this image were very contextualized in the late Republic, without talking about how the image has a rich, well-documented resonance within central Italy. This is a scabbard type intaglio of the type common amongst the Etruscan elites. And so that the image would have had deeper resonance beyond any possible immediate political significance of the image. That got me on to my glass pastes kick as a means of thinking about the reception of coins and coins as a reception of other images. The reason I like glass paste so much is that they are cheap. If you read Pliny, he hates them. He gives you 20 different ways on how to not get fooled into buying a glass paste instead of a real gem. Real Roman elites have real gems for their intaglios, but we have hundreds, thousands all over the place of these glass intaglios that are mold made, really quite cheap. But from Pliny, we know that this is the type of stone, orange stone, that would have been used by everyday people who were of an economic standard that they might need to mark a contract or send a letter. If there was anything like a Roman middle class, they would have been using this kind of glass intaglio. And so it provides one of our first ways of saying, yes, there were lots of people paying attention about coins because lots of the glass intaglios imitate Roman Republican coin types. Which puts us back into a world of bigger, of a bigger image conversation. I just show you this one. So here's the space, but notice it looks almost identical to this coin here. But the figures are reversed. You're like, okay, but impressions. But the center figure isn't reversed. So they flipped the two figures, but copied the man holding the pig exactly. If you see the bent knee, and so it's a form of imitation that lets us know that people are looking, thinking, and emulating coins and finding that there's nothing really more personal than what you sign your letters with or sign your contracts with. It stands for your own identity. It means that some middle-class Roman found this image accessible enough and they brought enough meaning to it to say that, yes, that can represent me. Anyways, I jumped ahead. This all led to a long article published in the Journal of Ancient History and Archaeology, which is edited by the numismatist Christian Garzak, whose work I very much admire, out in Romania, but we knew each other from the Ashmolean in Oxford again. And it has the added benefit that because it's 100% open access, I didn't have to pay the BM's ridiculous image fees, because fully open access images get waived through for their gems. And you can see here the close connection, and I just like the parallels between gems that have this sort of generic pastoral. Just make out, here's a goat eating a vine, and their shepherd. And the shepherd that we know, particularly from the coins, who finds the wolf and twins. And sometimes even they're aware on these last pastes that these two images are visually related, and they combine them. So you get the goats above the wolf and twins. And a mold could make dozens, maybe hundreds of these intaglios. Again, still being stuck in foundation legends. The oath swearing scene I got stuck in because of Aeneas, but that's another story. Was this coin that has never really, I think, previously been fully explained, but I would now argue extremely strongly that in the mid-70s, this is absolutely the apotheosis of Romulus, here, Togate, being taken into the chariot of Mars And we know he's being taken into a celestial setting because of the Scorpio. And we have Virgil's Georgics, as well as Servius's commentary to provide literary parallels. And the image of this apotheosis, I'm quite positive, is Ennius's apotheosis, version of the apotheosis that's being evoked, that's been primarily erased for us. It's echoed in Ovid in 2 different locations by other later traditions, particularly the Livian and the Ciceronian, both of which are highly rationalizing and thus don't let us see the full mythology of this apotheosis. And you're like, but that's not what the apotheoses look like. I know my Roman imperial coins. You get taken to heaven on the back of an eagle or flying eternitas. There's something else in the repertoire. If it was an apotheosis, it should look like that. Well, I want to assure you that you can have an apotheosis in a chariot. This is Lucius Verus's apotheosis. It's from the monument in Ephesus, and you can see the divinity here is grabbing his arm and dragging him into the chariot that's off to the heavens. So that you're like, but yeah, that's late and it's Asian, you know, what's going on there? Ephesus is a long way away from Rome. So we also have, it's highly disputed whose apotheosis it is, but probably Julius Caesar's apotheosis from the Belvedere altar. It's certainly Augustan in date, the whole altar image, and it's certainly a scene of apotheosis with the farewelling of the Togate figure heading into the heavens. And for me, at least, this is close enough in date and context that it is probably that it is probable that any Roman viewer would have recognized that image as Romulus, and that helps us put those coins, which are very sort of anti-Sullan, into sort of a reclaiming, just as the rest of the coins of that year have this Libertas theme and reclaim Venus as a Libertas theme. Venus, who had been closely associated with Sulla. There's lots of arguments that Sulla was presenting himself as a new Romulus. And perhaps one of the reasons that neither Caesar or Augustus really embraces Romulus as a model for themselves is because of the failures of Sulla to be celebrated positively. Oh, that's great with the earlier Hercules ones. That's wonderful. Now, how am I doing on time, Austin? Can I share a few more coins, or do I need to wrap it up?
We've got about 21 minutes, but if you go over a little bit with questions too, that's fine.
Great. So moving off Foundation Legends, it's not the only thing I got lost in. I knew that I had to include the Ais signatum, as they're sometimes called, or the Roman currency bars. I just call them currency bars in the book because of Crawford's scathing condemnation of the term Ais signatum. I respect and concur with his judgment, for all I slip and say Ais signatum still quite regularly. But no, I'm making a mistake when I do so. This beautiful bar is the Copenhagen bar. Normally we see the BM specimen, and I will encourage you that Copenhagen has been very generous with image rights of these beautiful specimens. And while they don't have their collection digitized, they did not charge for the right to publish this image, so they're sharing theirs, unlike the BM. And it's also nice for people to have, I was also happy to be able to illustrate another specimen of the same bar to create that visual diversity amongst the publications. But in that original, I'm going to write a chronological treatment. Where does it go? Well, does it go with the Pyrrhic War? Again, my historiographer in me was like, this cannot be true. There is no way that this is celebrating the use of incendiary pigs, even if the Total War video game has incendiary pigs as one of your options when you're playing video games. I do not believe that there are any video games. So I have a piece coming out in Christina Maria Molinari's new the second issue of her new journal, Ancient Numismatics, that revisits this. I argue, I hope convincingly, that the most likely date for this is the triumph of Lucius Caecilius Metellus in 251, and that the pig is a symbol of the island of Sicily, and the elephant is a symbol of his triumph, which the Metelli thereafter used the elephant on every last one of their coins, and all of the Metelli elephants always have bells. And I promise you, all of our known specimens of this element are wearing a bell. The Metellan elephant has a bell, and I believe that this is the Metellan elephant. Which of course brings up the question, how do you date these things? Which means we have to go back to the hordes, because that's the best we have, is to look at all of the horde evidence. So as I started to collect hordes in this new publication, I have come up with 5 hordes, 3 of which may not be complete. They're presumed hordes rather than fully attested hordes. And I argue that the hoarding evidence suggests strongly, as do other factors such as their chemical composition, which was already known from Burnett and Meeks in the 80s, that they're a single group, that they're within a couple decades of each other, that they're not, we don't have this long from the Pyrrhic War to the end of the First Punic War, a period of making bronzes. The article, and I personally hypothesize, which others have done before me, I would shout out Eric Condradia particularly, that they're probably booty distributions for soldiers and probably tied to triumphs. All of that work led me to discover, I guess if we can use that word, the Tuscan horde of 1778. The way I discovered it was in the drawings that were in the print collection of the British Museum in their new digitized archive. This is why we need everything digitized, because curators can't dig through everything. So if we digitize and we tag and label everything, then they're available for researchers like me who don't even know that they should be hunting through the prints and drawing sections of the British Museum to look for images of coins. So James Byers is a fascinating figure. His parents were good Jacobites and they left Scotland, taking their son to be educated in France. So although he's a proud Scotsman, he's a Catholic, and this is his sister. He bases himself in Rome. And so you can see he's pointing at a map of Rome authoritatively. He's an artist and an architect, but he makes most of his money by taking grand tourists, particularly almost all of the most famous grand tourists, royalists, royalty downwards on tours of Rome and Italy, showing them the antiquities, serving as the gentleman guide, the peer in the know, and then selling them valuable antiquities. And so we have these sketches because he was trying to hawk them to Townsley. It's the T here to say that these are from the Townsley print collection. So we sent these to Townsley with a nice letter saying, don't you want these weird things? We don't know what they are. There's some other examples, but he didn't even know that they were coins. And so we have a whole letter describing the find of this hoard. I've been in touch with a young man who's writing a PhD, and we came across this material at about the same time, and we've been in correspondence about it. Yeah, so here's one of Bayer's own sketches of himself drawing in the lamplit tubes. But he's most famous, and the reason you can actually do quite a bit of research is not because he hawked semis signatum, Roman currency bars, but it's because he is the one who brought the Portland vase to market. And so just to give you an idea of the level of antiquities, he is we would not have a Portland vase if we did not have a James Byers. Now, this bar on the left is the bar that if you go to a BM handling session, they will let you hold. And in these photos are courtesy of Andrew McCabe. And if you go to one of these handling sessions and hold this bar, they will explain to you that the damage, the reason the bar looks so awful, is because the coin department was blown up in World War II. That is true, and it is probably why this bar looks so terrible. And you can also go online and see the images of the bombed out British Museum coin department. But the thing that fascinates me about this bar, which according to the current BM collector, is not a real bar, but a cast, but an imitation, and that it doesn't have an inventory number, so I can't cite it, is that it has almost all of the same features as this other drawing by a Byers bar from his more expert drawer. So you see this big metal intrusion here. You see these holes. I've got it all nicely marked out for you. This bar here, this hole here. So I cannot tell you, because I've not actually investigated if the bar on the left is authentic or not, and has been misremembered its authenticity and passed around ANS visitors as an inauthentic coin, or if it is perhaps a cast of the of Byers bar that is still out there somewhere, that was given to the BM as a teaching specimen and then bombed. So if you ever find a bar that has these features, let me know. I would very much like to know about the story of it. And once we're in a post-COVID world and I can go back to England and visit museums one more time, we will investigate this bar properly and figure out its story. But it's definitely the mystery that's top of my mind. And then this is my last slide, and I just want to say that I buried much of the more speculative but more interesting things in the footnotes. So I had to make a call on a single date, but this is one of the most disputed dates, and I'm quite comfortable with the idea that this Vettius is Barry's brother-in-law, and that if we follow Brennan, that Varys was a very popular Praetor Urbanus particularly for his gains, his expenditure on grain, and his oversight of the law courts. And we can never know for sure, but I think there is a good chance that this coin is the Vettian family's response to Cicero's persecution of Verres. That that this is an attempt in the year of prosecution to say, no, Verres, remember that thing he did that you really liked? Forget about that governorship. Think about what he did right here in the city. He took care of you Romans here at home. He fulfilled all of his duties. So that is all I have. And thank you for listening to me tell you some stories about some coins and talk about the long drawn out process of writing my book.
And we have some time for questions. So if anyone wants to either unmute themselves and ask Professor Yarrow for a response, you can do that. You could also put it in the chat. I could either read it out, or Professor Yarrow could also read out the questions you put in the chat.
I'll ask a question. You talked about the Apotheosis of Romulus piece.
Yes.
And my book is due to come today in the mail, but I don't have it yet. So I don't know if you gave a reason for the moneyer thinking that was an important topic at that time.
I don't go into detail in the book, but you can, I'll drop a link into the chat. I discussed it in detail in my Journal of American Numismatic Journal 2018 article. I think it's important because in the mid, so here's that article, AJN 2018. In the mid 70s, Sulla's legislation was slowly being rolled back. And we don't get a full rollback never get a full rollback, but until about 70 itself, when we finally have a census that fully integrates all of the Italian citizens. But in 75, which is a very approximate date, I think we could shift that part of the series a couple years in either direction. Our relative chronology is pretty strong in the 70s, but our absolute chronology doesn't have enough points to get us fine-grained and specific and absolutely confident on our datings. There's clearly this reaction against the Sullan constitutions. And so Libertas goes with Romulus, and particularly I argue that Togate Romulus represents Romulus as a citizen rather than being royal, that he conveys assemblies, and one of the places for his apotheosis is from leading an assembly of the people. And so I think it's trying to represent Romulus as reclaim Romulus as not a military figure, and not so much a military figure or an authoritarian figure, but a rule of law, and a shared rule of law, where if you wear the toga, you can participate in government.
Thank you.
Question, Liv?
Yes.
This is Richard Schaefer. Maybe Warren would help on this too. Could you show the slide again for Crawford 330?
Sure. That's a very old. That's a very old slide. I have not.
Well, this may be a correction than you've already made, but I was curious about one of the lines shows the running rabbit.
Yes.
Which is no, it's the wreath. The coverage is 100% for the wreath. There are 2 dyes known, yet you say for the estimated number of dyes is 3. Now, if the coverage is 100%, that means the probability that the next coin found will be a new dye is 0. There cannot be any new dyes. So how can the estimate be 3?
Because I made the mistake of telling Excel to round up.
No, I want to interrupt.
Sure.
This is Warren. It's the estimated coverage that's 100%. It's not the actual coverage that is 100%. There's a possibility of error in there. And the idea that there might be 3 dyes accommodates that.
I don't understand, Warren. If each of the dyes is known from more than one specimen, the number of singletons is 0. And that means the coverage as defined by good is 0. The coverage is 100%.
No. That it means that we think the coverage is best estimated as 100%. It doesn't mean it really is 100%. That's a coverage estimate, not the actual coverage.
Okay.
Well,
so wait, I'll go back to Good's paper, but Good gives a mathematical formula, and if S is 0, the coverage is 1.
No, that's false. It's the estimated coverage, which is 1, not the actual coverage. These are all based on samples, and the sample gives you an estimate. It doesn't give you necessarily the actual value any more than these estimates of the number of dyes give you the actual value. They give you a justified best guess. And that's what that 100% is. It's not a fact. It's a justified best guess, but it could easily be wrong. Okay, I'm done.
It's also it's related. It's why I refuse to say that this issue was a certain number of coins. We can't know that, but we can illustrate the lowest and highest possible outputs based on assuming a certain number of coins average struck per die, and taking into account the likelihood of error. And is this meaningful? It's still meaningful. It gives me a ballpark to say that it's not going to be more than some other number we get into text, or it's definitely going to be less than this. That sort of more yet less approximate is often the best we're ever going to get for taking these numbers and translating them into historical work, but it's still something for means of comparison. And the estimate itself is valuable. Any other questions?
It's a lot of folks saying thank you, and we're right here at 2. So if we want to wrap up, we can.
Bye.
And get in touch. I'm on Twitter. I'm on email. I'm on my blog. I never mind talking about coins. It's my favorite thing in the whole world.
Thank you for watching the American Numismatic Society's YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like our online resources, publication, and events, you can support the Society by becoming a member. And don't forget to check out our book and eBay stores. The links are below.